What's up, everyone? Alex here, and welcome to my little corner of the internet. I wanted to talk about signs that not signs that I was always non-binary, but signs that there was a non-binary aspect to my identity for longer than I thought there was. And I wanted to kind of go over the little timeline of all the ways that I've identified over the years and how it kind of led up to me coming out as non-binary and then beyond that. So early on, I had a lot of difficulty trying to fit in with other men, with cisgender men, and with traditional masculinity. Around when I was in my 20s, I kind of assumed, I kind of felt out of place as a man among other men, and I kind of assumed that maybe it was a result of me being trans. Maybe, I didn't grow up, I wasn't raised as a man. Well, I wasn't raised as a boy. So I kind of assumed that maybe, I don't know, I just, something about what I was doing was wrong. I wasn't performing the manliness that was expected of me. I didn't feel like I was fitting in, that it kind of felt like my gender as a man was different than the gender of cisgender men. It was very strange. I've always been an advocate of trans man and cis man are not two different genders. But for me, I was a transgender man. I considered myself a man absolutely through and through, but there was some kind of aspect where it felt like I had a different layer or different aspect, different flavor, quality. At the time, I didn't have the words for gender quality or alignment, at least early on. I considered myself a man, but I did not like the term transmasculine. I came to the conclusion that that was just not a term for me, because I didn't see masculinity as a defining trait of my gender. And that sort of paradoxically clashes with this idea that masculinity is important for me in passing as a man. So there's a lot of complications there where it's okay, masculinity doesn't play a role in my gender. I don't consider myself masculine aligned or transmasculine, but I want to be able to pass as a man. So traditionally, I present as male because being a man is important to me. But then there's all these other aspects at play where I'm kind of butting heads with the not wanting to categorize myself as masculine, but the masculinity being sort of a cornerstone of being able to pass. It's a complicated mess for sure. And I haven't really come to terms. I haven't grappled with that aspect of my identifying as a man, as a non-binary man. It's complicated. I mean, for some time, I talked about, I considered myself a very binary man, and I, presented very masculinely. And then things became a little more loose with the presentation, and it was more generally masculine, but I wasn't entirely too worried about presenting hyper masculinely, passing as a very binary masculine man. I was leaning more neutral toward my later 20s, and that was leading up to coming out as non-binary, yes, but as a demi-boy specifically. I came out as some flavor of non-binary. I think that's probably my favorite part of the whole journey, is coming out as some flavor of non-binary, because it was my way of kind of tiptoeing the line and being well, there's something there. And I didn't flat out call myself demi-boy at first, but I accepted that there was a non-binary aspect of my identity and that I just did not traditionally fit in with traditional malehood, because I said traditional too many times in that sentence, but I felt more like a gender neutral man. I felt like a demi-boy. I felt partially male, and that kind of opened up a whole bunch of opportunities for, calling my gender different things, non-binary, unaligned, all of these different, sometimes gender non-conforming. Gender non-conformity is a little complicated for non-binary people, and it's so variable and so personal. So for me, like, gender non-conforming isn't always femininity, but it can be, and for some people it's not at all, even if they're non-binary men. And for just non-binary people who don't have any kind of binary aspect to their identity, it could be anything. Androgyny can be gender nonconformity for non-binary people. So there was the kind of gender nonconforming aspects ish, and experimenting with, femininity, because for me, I thought maybe gender nonconformity could mean playing around with the opposite end of this spectrum, the spectrum being the binary, not the gender spectrum. The gender spectrum is not a spectrum. It's a whole 3D model of so many different identities. A galaxy of identities is typically what I say. So I, came out as some flavors non-binary. I called myself a demi-boy for the longest time. That was like I'm a transgender man. I'm also a demi-boy. And it took me some time, surprisingly, to just call myself non-binary. Sometimes I'd call myself a non-binary man, but I really wanted to emphasize non-binary man. The man part was very important still, and it still will be, throughout this whole journey. It's always going to be the basis or the core of my identity. But I was slowly accepting non-binary as just a label by itself, not a part of my identity. Non-binary is a whole gender in and of itself for me, and it doesn't just describe a part of me. It's not a clarifying term. I was accepting that I can just call myself non-binary, and I don't have to explain to people I'm a man too, and also all these other things. Non-binary can just be non-binary. I was even hesitant to use the non-binary flag, having it on a button, or having my non-binary flag on my wall. I still worried oh no, they're I should probably use just the non-binary man flag. I shouldn't just use the non-binary flag by itself, because what if people assume that I'm entirely neutral, entirely away from the binary, or all these other things. Maybe they think I use they them pronouns, and that I don't know, I'm transitioning to be androgynous or something. I don't know. I had all these weird little fears of just using the non-binary label by itself, but I slowly got more comfortable with doing that. And of course, knowing that I was partially male and partially something else, I wanted to know what that something else was. I think it's a common experience that demigender people are partially a gender, and then the other part is typically in the neutral or genderless range. Commonly, this is a common experience, but I was determined to find a name for that other part. So I would obsessively try to figure out, at least first of all, figure out the percentage of maleness, and I'm okay, 75 to 80% male, and then there's something else there that's making it feel like a demi-boy identity. There's something more tangible than just it's some other part that doesn't matter. I didn't have 75 or 80% of a gender entirely. It's just the malehood that was that percentage, and there was something else that made up the rest of the 100%. So obviously there was something else there, and I started doing a lot of deep diving and, my classic list of things that I am not, and trying to list off just the things I know that other part isn't. I knew it wasn't genderless, and I knew it wasn't female, and I knew it wasn't fluid or flux, and all these different things. I also said that I'm not multigender. That was on my list of things that I was not. So I was going through all of that and just insisting that my gender had two distinct parts. And then I discovered that I was bigender. So up until this point, there's been signs that there was something more to my gender. And it was always something, in high school being like a very butch lesbian, and there being signs of like being uncomfortable being a girl, feeling dysphoric about being called a girl. Like at a certain point, there were signs that I was actually transgender. And then not fitting in with traditional masculinity with cis men, that was the sign that there might have been a non-binary aspect to my identity. I just didn't think of that as an option because I haven't been doing this like queer content creation for very long. I've been a YouTuber since 2016, something like that. I've been a YouTuber longer than it seems because I had a gaming channel back in the day, and I was doing that for a few years before I did this channel. So that's why when I started this channel, I was already ready to make videos, and my first video was already like of a specific quality, and I already had like a good setup and stuff because I had already been doing gaming YouTube for quite some time. So I haven't always been like the blogger, the YouTuber talking about your identity is valid. You can be non-binary and a man at the same time. You can be non-binary and have an identity that has nothing to do with the binary. And I emphasize that a lot, but if I had started the channel much sooner, maybe I would have taken my own advice. So it took me way too long to discover that I was non-binary because I had all this internalized invalidation happening where I thought that I just couldn't call myself non-binary because there were so many other aspects, so many different little pieces happening that I guess I just thought that like I didn't count as non-binary. So it took me a while to realize I was non-binary, but it was always there. It took me some time to realize it was there. And of course, coming to this part in my journey where I'm trying to figure out what the other two parts, or the other part of my gender is, male and something else. Not a lot of people try to obsess over that other part unless there's some kind of sign that there's multigenderedness happening. And in my case, yes, that's exactly what that was. It turned out I was bigender. And, there were signs early on, and I just didn't quite realize it. And I came to the conclusion that this other part was neutral. I had called myself Neptunian, which is, it's one of the celestial genders. Let me get the, actual wording, because, it's been so long. It's a gender that is linked to the void and has a soft celestial masculine energy. And these types of genders, the celestial genders, it's always never a huge amount of gender quality. Never hyper masculine, never hyper feminine, and it's not male aligned, female aligned, neutrois aligned. They're not specific gender aligned. It's just qualities. It's just qualities and aspects, and it's like a soft connection to them. So I liked the sort of, I was going to say starry. I like the celestial, the cosmic nature of these genders. So I was like, oh, that would be cool to call myself. And I liked the soft masculine energy. So I adopted the Neptunian label for quite some time, longer than I had expected to use this term. I guess I just liked the being linked to the void, maybe in my brain, instead of it being genderless, I thought maybe an unknown aspect of the identity, because void is sometimes used as an unknown aspect rather than genderlessness. I've seen it in things like void masculine and void feminine. Gender void kind of implies, yes, genderlessness, but also an empty space where a gender should be. So the voidness kind of, the void part of that identity helped me to explain that there was this empty space where something neutral should be. And I mean, is there neutral? There isn't technically a neutral celestial gender. I think it's either both or just gendered. It could be aporine. I believe Mercurian feels kind of aporine, but aporine doesn't mean neutral automatically. It just means it's not feminine or masculine, but there's still a strongly gendered part. So there was my sign that, there was some kind of aporine aspect to my identity, but that's way down the line. This would have been in probably 2017, 2018 is when, coming out as Demi Boy and then exploring that other part that I called Neptunian, and then I finally decided that neutrois was the term for me. So part male and part neutrois. And at this point, just entirely discarding the idea of being transmasculine or transneutral, just doing away with those specific terms because I was just a transgender man. It felt weird to be trans new mask, trans neutral. Like, I don't know what it was. I think it just limited my identity to certain aspects. And I knew that my gender was so much more. Gender full, full of aspect aligned things. So there was that. And then coming out as bigender, I think, was the funniest part of this whole thing. Almost as iconic as some flavor of non-binary. Actually, maybe more iconic than coming out as some flavor of non-binary and then not specifying, even though I'm the, I know labels guy. I'm the guy who knows all the labels. And it's so funny avoiding saying a label because I was embarrassed. I came out to someone, I think I had texted it to them, and they were non-binary themselves and entirely removed from the gender binary. This was the person who helped me coin gender disobedient. And just I like the idea that I didn't want to name a specific label, and I didn't want to just entirely say I was non-binary or a non-binary man, even though I was saying it to somebody who would have absolutely understood where I was coming from and would have absolutely accepted it. But at the time, I just was going through a weird crisis of oh no, people are going to think I'm a faker. So very complicated, strange feelings. And of course, this is this is quite a while, a decade after moving out of my parents' house. So cutting off ties with my family entirely. So I have the sort of privilege of not ever having to worry about bringing this up with family and trying to explain this and trying to make sure that they will accept me and allow me to live as my authentic self. I came out after I was already away from my family. So that's also the weird part about it, is that my only fear was just my non-binary peers and other trans people in my circle of trans people that I know. It's very weird how that kind of worked out. So the bigender coming out, iconic. I had a dream that I came out as bigender on Twitter. I typed it out. I was typing it up and I was like, oh, I made this super cool discovery. Bigender was not on my bingo card for genders I probably am. I never considered it at all, and I don't know why. Probably because I kept seeing my gender as parts and not whole genders. So I was going to go online. When I woke up, I was going to go on Twitter and start typing it up like, oh, shit. It's me. I'm bigender. Like, I was ready to, like, finish the post that I was trying to type up in my dream. And I realized it wasn't real. So I made a post and I was like, oh, I actually had a dream that I was coming out as bigender, and I was about to officially come out on here and then realize it wasn't a thing. So I'm just going to post this just to laugh at it. And then literally a week later, I had a moment of like, oh, no, that was a sign. It was real. Like, I don't come off this way, but I am a pretty spiritual person. Not religious, but I'm a pretty spiritual person. So I absolutely thought, like, oh, the universe was telling me something. Like, my dreams always specifically lead me down these, like, emotional rabbit holes, like, telling me something that I need to know, which usually means having the same dream on repeat all the time, every freaking night. So this, having some kind of odd, unlikely, queer-related dream was like a sign, pretty much. And so I came out as bigender, and, you know, that was kind of it. I felt like that was like the end of it. Like, I'm bigender now. Finally, I have a way to explain myself, and it feels so me. So I basically turned it into a brand. I made a whole blog with the catchy, you know, your bigender big brother, YB3, just all these, like, I made it a thing. I made myself a logo, and it just became everything about me. So I took that as a sign of, this is me forever. I finally figured myself out. There's a lot of things that are the kind of, not concrete, but the everlasting, this is always my identity aspects of my identity. So I'm always a man. I'm always going to be non-binary. There might always be a neutral aspect, a ningender aspect of my identity. Aporagender is now going to be that. I'll get into that in a sec. There's all these things that, like, are always going to be there. And then there's the other stuff around it that keeps changing. Oh, multigender as well. Always transgender, always multigender. I don't think that's ever going to change. The number of genders I discover might change. I'm not sure. The number of labels I use keep duplicating. So there's that. I should have said multiplying. Duplication, I think, is multiplying in twos, but I don't freaking know, man. So we kind of started the cycle over again, where I called myself bigender, and neutrois eventually just kind of became the placeholder label for some kind of neutral gender that I didn't know what it was. So it was really just that there wasn't a word for it. There were types of words. My usage of neutrois was aporagender, a neutral aporagender, but I didn't really consider that. Aporagender, first of all, I don't like gender labels for myself personally that have the gender ending. So, you know, I don't know. Like, aporagender was not something that I would have ever considered. I liked it as a term generally, but I had discovered maverique as a term, and I kind of got this, like, obsession with following maverique blogs because it was such a fascinating concept to me. The idea of a gender that was outside of anything that I experience at all. No masculinity, no femininity, no neutrality, and not genderless, just its own standalone gender. I guess that's why I liked it better than the idea of aporagender, because it wasn't an umbrella term. It was just a gender in and of itself. And I was really fascinated with people's experiences with that. So I followed a lot of maverique blogs, and that eventually led me to following blogs that centered around otherinity, and otherin being just outside of masculine, feminine, neutral, and androgynous. So anything outside of those is otherin for the most part. It is not related to being xenogender, so it's not far outside of like the concept of gender itself, just outside of those four qualities. So I started following blogs that talked about otherinity, about being otherin, maverique, for the most part being an otherin gender, being an autonomous gender. I started kind of educating myself on this like vast network of terms outside of what I was used to talking about. I always talked about being a man, being neutral, talking about neutral genders, talking about masculinity, and kind of staying in a specific bubble of topics, which I still like to do. I like to talk about tangential topics. So if I'm talking about being neutrois, I might actually move into talking about genderlessness or being unaligned or being neutral aligned. So I might talk about being aporagender, or, talk about the agender experience, and then kind of pull it back to compare to my own experience. So, that was always my thing. Talk about my experience, and then similar experiences, parallel experiences that can be compared to my own, but are distinct. So I just had this obsession with otherinity and with maverine genders. I guess that was like the sign that those are also tangential to my experience. I just didn't know how. There was something about the maverique label that really called to me. And I didn't consider myself maverique. It wasn't a term I wanted to call myself. It just wasn't like a gender that I ever considered. So I just was following these blogs thinking that, I'm doing this because I want to learn more about these things and then talk about them and obsess over them and make lots of essays about them. And I had realized that the quality of maverique is what spoke to me. So I liked the idea of an unambiguous, autonomous, otherin quality. That's basically what maverine is, all three of those at once, and sort of a, based on inner conviction of gender. So just your own personal belief of your gender, not bound by any kind of categorization, not at all related to the binary or neutrality, just a gender that kind of stands on its own as a maverick. After realizing, you can be maverine and not maverique, which that's everything. You can be neutral but not neutroi, and you can be masculine and not a man. So in the same sense, you can be maverine and not maverique. So I had seen a post from the Maverick Agenda. That's one of the blogs that I follow, and this person had said, yeah, you could be maverine and not maverick, and it just kind of clicked, and I was like, oh, I like that. And then just something clicked, and transmaverine was the term that I took on. I guess because I liked that it wasn't related to masculinity, femininity, or neutrality. So I wouldn't ever consider myself transmasc, transfem, transneutral, and it was unambiguous and autonomous. Something that just kind of stood alone on its own as a distinct transgender experience. So I came out as transmaverine 3 days after Maverick Visibility Day, I believe. So there were signs there that there was a maverine quality to my gender, and I just didn't know how. And it turned out my transgender identity as a whole had a maverine quality. So that's like the entire umbrella. No, if you were to take the tree of life, I guess is the way to describe it. So the domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. If you like took that and instead it was my gender, domain is like, well, life is the top one. So person, and then underneath transmaverine or transgender. Yeah, transgender underneath that, and then transmaverine. Like, it's one of the highest tiers, and it affects everything that's underneath it. Underneath that would be non-binary, and then bigender, and that would split into male, maybe using descriptors, male, neutral, and then it's man, and it's asterisk. It would have been neutrois, but, that has changed as well. So it's interesting how it would like break down like that. And that's basically how I experience transmaverinity, meaning that like there is an autonomous quality to the entirety of my gender experience. So that's how I kind of see it. Not a hierarchy. It's not like transmaverine is the most important. It's just that it's the broader term that encompasses all the other things under it, and those things encompass more specific things. So I definitely just claimed that bigender is the family that I belong to, and that male and neutral are the genuses that I belong to, and then man and asterisk are the species I belong to, which is very interesting how that works, because you don't give multiple genuses and species to animals, and that's not how that works. But I like the idea that an animal could have multiple species names. I think that's really funny. Technically, animals can have multiple species epithets if they are subspecies or hybrids. Then you have a trinomial nomenclature. It's not just genus species. Armadillidium vulgare. Then it's Armadillidium vulgare. I don't know if there's a subspecies to that type of isopod, but that's the only species name I could think of. This has nothing to do with gender. It's interesting, I wrote this outline before coming out as asterisk, before deciding to do away with neutrois as a label. First of all, it's kind of sad. That makes me very sad. Neutrois was important to me, but it wasn't exactly what I needed. So I had to say goodbye to it. I sent it away to be rehomed. There's a loving family out there who now has neutrois, and it's getting all the love and attention that it needs that I could not provide for it, because there was just a compatibility issue. But I wrote this outline before doing away with that label, which I think it's really funny. There's an entire section missing. I don't have the part where I decided neutrois was not for me. I think I kept it as my list of... It might still be on my list of terms that I use on my card. I can't remember. I had originally kept it and changed the caption to say, like, yes, like, this is still here because it's still relevant and I still talk about it in past videos, and I want it to, like, stay as, like, this was kind of the basis for finding a better gender label. So, I don't know. It might still be there. But, yeah, I guess I kind of circled back on the, like, neutrois being a placeholder label and trying to figure out this other neutral aspect of me. And then I said fuck it and coined my own term for myself. And I was very scared to do so because I wasn't sure. Well, I mean, I didn't want it to, I didn't care if it caught on. People liked it. People really liked asterisk as an idea. But I wasn't worried about people using this term. I coined 500 other terms, probably more, and my hope was that it filled a linguistical gap for some people. Wherever there wasn't a word for something someone was, I had a word for that I came up with that might help people. And of course, I've made pride flags for every single term that I've coined for the most part. There's like one or two that I didn't feel the need to, or just didn't feel like it. But I came up with this term for myself just so that I had something to describe my own gender experience without worrying about it fitting someone else's experience, having a pride flag that exactly included what it needed to include. Like, I didn't worry so much. Like, I made this term and this flag very much for me. So it was interesting experiencing that, because of all the terms that I've coined, I never considered any of them mine. I never used them for myself. I felt a connection to them, for sure. There's a lot of terms that I've coined where I was like, I could get behind this one. Like, I would absolutely call myself this, but it's not exactly what I need. And I guess that's why we coin terms for ourselves, to make them exactly what we need. I'm definitely going to be doing a video on that. Coining a term where, like, another similar term kind of falls flat. It fails to encompass everything that this person's looking for. So it's like, okay, this label, but I need it more specific. So I'm going to come up with a label that is a little more specific or includes different things, just something related, but its own term with a specific definition on its own. And, now I've done that for myself, and I like that a lot, that I have a word that's mine. Maybe that word will evolve over time, just, being easier to pronounce, or maybe including other aspects. It doesn't have to be super specific, and obviously you don't have to check all the boxes to consider yourself asterisk or any kind of gender. That gender is for you, that label's for you to use. If it's not an exclusive term, terms that are exclusive to certain neurotypes, certain cultures, intersex exclusive terms, like, as long as it's not those, then, terms are for you to use the way that you need them to be used, in the same way that any kind of adjective for a human being is used the way that we want to use them. That's just, it's not a misuse of terminology. It's just how the human language works. It's flexible, and we do what we can. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Just the whole timeline of, well, not the whole timeline, but the timeline of me making all these gender micro discoveries. I originally called this video Signs That I Was Non-Binary, but I went so far into beyond non-binary. The non-binary discovery is pretty early on in this timeline, so I'll probably call it something else. Just gender micro discoveries, I suppose. Just a timeline of gender discoveries, and there's absolutely more to come. The more that I understand my gender and its place in the transgender community, in society, the more I understand how gender affects me and how gender oppresses me as a concept, I'll have better, more refined language to talk about those things. And I encourage that for anyone. Like, it helps to look deeper. It helps to talk more about your gender and figure out exactly what it is gender is to you or not. Even throwing the whole thing out and saying not applicable at all is, that's a totally valid path to go down, because gender can be oppressive. Gender can be restrictive, and sometimes you just want to do away with all of it. And that's also a part of the self-exploration journey. For me, I have so much gender, so gendered. Has always been the core of everything, is that gender has never been something that I find inaccessible or not applicable to me. Instead, I've seen gender as something I'm trying to adapt for myself in a society that obsesses over whether or not you're fitting a specific kind of gender. That's my takeaway for the most part. That's it. My gender journey and more to come, obviously. I don't have anything I haven't included in my videos so far, really, but there could be more. I will always talk about my experiences with gender, and I will always answer questions about gender because it's such a fascinating topic. It's such a fascinating concept. This went on a little longer than I thought it would, but it's a good way to it's kind of ending Pride Month a little bit by having this long video on almost a recap of things. I don't think I'm doing a video next week, but that doesn't really matter because people could be watching this in 2027 in like August. So it doesn't matter me saying that I'm not going to do a video next week, but you know, just a little break would be nice while I plan for the rest of the year's schedule and getting more into the aporagender side of things, probably going back over that concept, especially since like now I have a better understanding of aporagender as a term and its usefulness and what it encompasses. So deep dive into that and all the little intricacies of being aporagender. So yeah, that's the conclusion. I'm bigender, I'm transmaverine, I'm a non-binary man, I have a neutral gender, I'm unaligned, and I am aporagender in some way as well. There's a lot to it. So anyway, I am signing off for now. See you later.